Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. Today is a swatching video and I've decided to create a list of 15 of my new favourite Daniel Smith colours. So to share this with you, what I've decided to do is create a grid, and I'm going to be using tape to paint out really nice squares. So I'm not sure why I feel like doing it this way, but it might be because recently I've been enjoying a book called Paintings for the Future, Hilma af Klint, and in that book, she uses a lot of squares. So I've decided to do square swatches today, and I'm using an artist tape. This one is called Express It tape, and it comes from Art to Art, which is a local art shop near where I live, but they also have an online shop. So I'm using a combination of thick and thin tape in order to space out 15 squares evenly on the page and also give myself a little bit of room to write some information about each colour. The paper that I'm using is Arches paper, the cold pressed paper, 300 GSM, and this is the paper that I use most often, and it's nice to do swatches on a paper that you regularly use so you can see how they look on that particular paper. The paper that I'm using is 10 inch by 14 inch in size, and the little squares that I'm going to paint into are 5 centimetres by 5 centimetres. So it's all worked out quite nicely on the page, and I'm really looking forward to doing it in this way. So let me just talk through my setup and then we'll get into the swatching. So to get nice, clean swatches, what I've decided to do is squeeze a little bit of each watercolour paint out of the tube into my porcelain paint palettes and have one colour in each well. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful and methodical today than I usually am, because I want to see these colours as they are out of the tube and not have them picking up remnants from my messy paint palette. So I've added in a drop or two of water onto each little bit that I've squeezed out, and I've tried to only squeeze out a small amount so I don't use up too much. And this will settle on the paint and help loosen it up so that as I go to do each swatch, it's easy to mix the paint with water and come up with a nice puddly consistency. So the first colour that I've decided to put in, and it is a new one to me, is Nickel Azo Yellow. And this is a really versatile yellow, and that's the reason that I chose it, because I decided that I didn't really want to go with a lemon yellow and a warm yellow. I'm not a huge fan of lemon yellow, and what I could see from this colour is that it has a huge amount of variance in it. So when it's painted in a quite saturated form, like I'm doing now, it's quite a warm yellow, but if you dilute it down with quite a bit of water, it becomes more lemon yellow-like. And it has a beautiful, rich and luminous quality. It really does feel like sunshine. It's really special paint. And it's also a paint that disperses easily in water. And that means it wants to flow. It's beautiful for doing wet on wet techniques and getting washes down and things like that. So I'm hoping that this one yellow will be enough in my palette, but I'm open to making changes to this palette the more that I use it. So this is a very clean colour. It's transparent. It doesn't have any granulation in it. And in the past, I have included a lot of granulating paints in my palettes, but I'm starting to have quite the appreciation for nice, clean, transparent colours that mix beautifully with other colours without providing that texture. So I've decided to go with a bit of a mix this time and have more clean colours in the palette. Having said that, I do still have some absolutely gorgeous granulations too. So the next colour that I wanted to try out in a palette is Aussie Red Gold. So this is a mix of a variety of pigments. It's a transparent colour. It doesn't have any granulation. It's a really warm golden colour. And this is a colour that I thought perhaps could replace quinacridone gold, but I'm not 100% sure. It's a little bit more red-orange. Both the Nico Azo Yellow and the Aussie Red Gold are going to be great colours to mix into my selection of blues in order to create a wide range of greens. The Nickel Azo Yellow, when mixed with Indan Throne Blue, creates all sorts of colours that are helpful, colours that resemble something like green gold if there's more yellow in it, but if there's more blue in it, it can look like a perylene green. So these colours are great for mixing. Moving on to my selections for reds. I have chosen quinacridone Coral, which is a transparent, non-granulating colour, and it's a beautiful pinky red. I'm using it as my warm red in the palette, and I'm not sure if I might need to bring in something like a pyrrole red, a scarlet or something like that, a warmer red. This one is a little bit on the pinky side, but it's such a gorgeous colour, and I do like to paint quite a lot of botanicals, flowers and things like that, and it feels like it's going to be a beautiful addition for the type of work that I do. I've always had a soft spot for coral, and this coral, if you add more water to it, it becomes pinker. So the more saturated it is, it leans a little bit more towards orange, but if you add more water, it goes a little bit more like a quinacridone rose. So it's one of those colours that is a little bit unpredictable, but very beautiful. So the next colour is quinacridone rose, and this is a very, very popular pigment. It's great if you are going to use a very limited palette. You can mix gorgeous oranges and purples with it. It's also transparent and non-granulating. You can mix quinacridone rose with French ultramarine to get a wide range of purples. So you can get things like Rose of Ultramarine, which is one of the colours that I've had in previous lists that I've shared. And Imperial Purple, if you mix in more ultramarine, you'll get something closer to Imperial Purple. So I feel like having quinacridone rose and some kind of ultramarine in your palette is a really good combo to have. So these are very standard colours, but they are very, very helpful. Similarly, having a burnt sienna is another colour that I like to have in a palette because it is such a useful colour to have. So a new addition to my palette is Moonglow. Now, I've had this colour for years and have never really used it all that much, but I was looking for a darker colour that I could put in my palette that I can mix into some of the lighter colours if I want to change the value. I also thought this one would be quite interesting because it has multiple pigments in it, and depending on how much water you add, different colours seem to come through in the mix, which I do like. I'm looking for some interesting options in my palette. I did think about adding in neutral tint or Payne's Grey, but I decided to go with Moonglow. There are some websites that say that this colour isn't light fast, so that's something to be mindful of. It does have a really nice granulation in it. The texture in Moonglow is really pretty. So another colour that is new to me, and this one I have fallen head over heels for, and it's not a colour that I thought that I would enjoy. I bought it a bit on a whim, but there's something about it. It lays down beautifully when you paint it, and it's this gorgeous soft purple, a lovely lavender colour. It's almost a little bit creamy. It's just such a nice tone in it, and I can see myself using it a lot. And it's a colour that you can mix into other colours. It says that it's semi-transparent, but it's almost got a little bit of opacity in it, and I feel like if you mixed it in with some other colours, you're going to get some pastels, which are always interesting with watercolour. It is a mixture of pigments. I believe it's got some ultramarine in it. It's granulating. It's got a fairly gentle granulation to it. It's just a colour that is really pretty out of the tube, and it's nice to have colours like that. These are the ones that aren't essential in a palette, so I could have made a smaller palette without lavender in it, but they are often the colours that also make you feel excited and take you in different directions. So let's move on to the next colour, which is so vivid and bright. It's probably the most vibrant staining colour that I have. This one and the next one that I'm going to paint out are very, very strong, almost bossy pigments, but they are fantastic when you are looking for that punchy colour. And French Ultramarine, which is what this one is, has incredible granulation in it. It's really strong, and you see the sediment in the paint. It has a lovely texture, and I adore the granulation in this paint, and I really like painting with it. There's something about how this paint lays down that's really nice as well. And being an ultramarine, it's a valuable colour for mixing. Mixing purples, mixing greens, mixing neutrals. It's a real workhorse. It's a fantastic colour to have in a palette. I also like the next colour. This one here that I'm painting now is Indanthrone Blue. This is such a rich, juicy dark. It's really dark. And that can be helpful if you want to darken colours and create some nice, earthy, rich colours. It's also a paint that disperses easily in water. It's great for wet on wet techniques. One thing to be mindful with PB60, which is the pigment, is that there is a colour shift with it, so it will dry lighter. It's still a very strong pigment, even though it does dry lighter, because it is exceptionally dark when you paint it out. So I still like it, even though it has that colour shift, but the colour shift is something to be aware of. I was tossing up between putting indigo in my palette or Indanthrone Blue, but I decided to go with Indanthrone Blue because it is a single pigment, it doesn't have any black in it, and I feel like it would be more helpful for mixing other colours. So I have quite a few blues in this palette because I have been loving on blue lately and painting a lot of paintings that have various blue shades in them. So I wanted to have quite a bit of variety. So I've also included Cerulean Blue Chromium, which is a cooler blue. It has a little bit more of a sky blue or a seaside blue feel to it. It also, like French Ultramarine, has a strong granulation with a lot of sediment in it. So it would depend on whether you like that or not, but I do like that in this particular colour. And you can add water to it and dilute it quite a bit to get really nice soft blues. There is another colour in the Daniel Smith range, which is just Cerulean Blue rather than Cerulean Blue Chromium. I prefer the Chromium because I find it easier to paint out. It re-wets nicely, and also it's stronger, it's more vivid. So if you're looking for something a bit softer, the other one might be the one to look at. So now I'm painting out Cobalt Teal Blue. This colour is brand new to me. I've only just received it today. So I have not played with this one, but I felt like my palette needed a turquoise. I was planning out this palette. I've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about these colours, and I realised that because I don't have a phthalo green in this palette or a phthalo blue green shade, that it might be a bit tricky to get nice turquoises. And so I thought it would be worthwhile to bring one in. And I've heard a lot of good things about this particular colour. So this one is semi-transparent and granulating. I seem to have quite a lot of granulating blues in this particular selection of colours, but I do have Indanthrone Blue, which is a nice clean blue, which would be great for some mixes. So I think this will be okay. And I do like the granulation in the blues. Maybe it is the texture. The texture just reminds me of the ocean and the sea, and yeah, I like these colours a lot. I can imagine mixing this Cobalt Teal Blue with some burnt sienna to make some more muted turquoises, perhaps mixing it with some buff titanium. But I'll talk a bit more about that as I move through because I still have some colours to paint out in my final row. So another new colour that I really love is this Jotun Genuine, which is a colour that I'd never really thought about adding into my palette. And then when I painted it out and saw the large variety of greens that you can get from it and the lovely granulation. So I'm in a bit of a granulation phase here on the palette, but I really, really like the texture and the way that this green has an earthiness to it. It's like a mixture between phthalo green and perylene green, but it has the best qualities of both of those greens. It has the darkness of a perylene green, but the vibrancy of a phthalo green, but without being garish. And I feel like this is a colour that I would use straight out of the tube. I love phthalo green and phthalo blue because you can get incredible mixes with them, but they are very strong pigments and colours that I often find overpower other colours, and I don't really like using them straight up out of the tube. So with this palette, I wanted to try and get as many colours as possible that I would use straight out of the tube as well as in mixes. So it's a Primatech colour, which means there is no pigment information. It is made with crushed up minerals in it, and it gives it this fantastic texture, which is a little bit different from some of the other granulations. And there's a lot of variance. As I said, there's quite a lot of different greens coming through in the one colour, which is lovely. So I also wanted to add another green in. In the past, I've used various other greens like perylene green, cascade green, and undersea green. And I wanted to bring in some different greens for this palette and push myself to try different combinations. And so the green that I brought in is Serpentine Genuine, which is another Primatech colour. It's also got that wonderful granulation and variety. This one can look almost like an olive green, but then there's this neon colour that comes through, a very luminous green as well, and quite a mottled effect. So you can see some of this olive green on the top, but then when it dries, you'll see that it also has a quite strong lime green, but it's still earthy and muted. I really like it. So the next colour I'm painting out is Burnt Sienna, and this is a semi-transparent colour with some granulation in it. The granulation isn't quite as intense as some of the blues. It's just a nice, subtle granulation. This is a colour that is so useful for making more earthy tones, and I love using colours that are a bit muted down. I love even just adding burnt sienna into a buff titanium to get a peachy colour. It's a colour that I use a lot in my acrylic painting, and I decided that I just wanted to bring in one earth tone, and I contemplated various colours like burnt umber, raw umber, yellow ochre, and I just thought about my work and what I often use, and I realised that burnt sienna is probably the one that I reach for the most. So I decided to go with that as my earthy colour, which is great for mixing. So the next colour is a bit of a wild card. I wanted to at least include one colour that comes from the luminescent range, either an iridescent colour or one of the duochrome colours. In the past, I've really loved duochrome autumn mystery. Today, I decided to put in iridescent goldstone because that's a colour that I've been using a surprising amount. It has a really elegant shimmer to it. It's not a gold that screams gold, and you can mix it into other colours, and when it dries, it's very subtle but lovely, and the gold is very earthy. So it's a transparent colour, as I said, great for mixing into other colours. It's got a bit of granulation in it. I just find it really pretty. So that's my fun colour. This one and the lavender are really two colours that I've popped in for a bit of fun and to take this palette in a little bit of a more interesting direction just from your standard colours. And finally, I've put in buff titanium, which is a semi-transparent creamy colour. It actually feels quite opaque when you first start working with it, but if you add more water, it does get quite transparent, which I like because you can add it into colours, lighten the colours, make them a bit more pastel, but without making them chalky, which is really nice. And it's got a lovely eggshell off-white tone to it, and it's a colour that I really can't go without. Because the way that I work, I do love getting almost gouache-like colours into my paintings. I work in a very abstract way, so pretty much anything goes, and I like to get as much variety and options from my paints. And just by having buff titanium in a palette, I can almost get like a set of gouache colours by adding this colour into all of these other colours. The colours become pastel and opaque. So to me, it's really valuable just for the diversity that it brings to the palette. It's also a very useful colour if you are doing more traditional paintings and painting landscape scenes, portraits and things like that. It's a colour that is quite popular, so definitely one to consider if you're putting a palette together. So that's the final colour in my set of 15. And as I said, I spent a long time thinking about these colours. I do feel like they have that nice mix of all the things, which is what I was looking for. And they are going to provide me with a lot of possibilities without having to have all the colours in the world. So what I plan to do with this set is actually set up a palette. I'm looking at what palette I might buy. I want to get one with large wells because that's the way that I like to work. And then I want to challenge myself to create work just using these colours. So I could have gone more limited, but I really like having about 15 colours as it does provide a lot of variety and some convenience colours so you're not having to mix absolutely everything. I can already see that this nickel azo yellow has gone behind the tape. It is a colour that really wants to move. If you drop it into water, it flows. And I can see that it hasn't been able to hold very well. And that's okay. It looks like the other squares are absolutely fine. It's just this one paint. I don't think it's anything to do with the tape. I think it's the paint that has caused this one to bleed out. But you can see all the other colours have worked out quite well. I've written a little bit of info underneath each colour, including the pigments and whether the colour is transparent or semi-transparent, granulating or non-granulating. You usually can tell, particularly the granulation you can usually see, but sometimes the transparency, depending on how saturated you paint the colours, can be a little bit more difficult to see. I actually thought the Aussie Red Gold was semi-transparent, but as it turns out, it is transparent. If you added more water to it, you would be able to see that more clearly. I love some of the combinations just as they are. This nickel azo yellow, or azo yellow, and the lavender is really pretty together. I really like this lavender with a lot of colours actually. The lavender with the greens is really nice too. I can see some lovely opportunities with this cobalt teal blue, combining it with some of these earthy colours. And I'll be excited to mix more purples using the quinacridone rose with the French ultramarine. And the quinacridone coral, I'm hoping to make a whole lot of peachy colours using this quinacridone coral, mixing it in with things like the buff titanium, maybe a touch of Aussie Red Gold, bit of burnt sienna, things like that, and seeing what I can come up with as far as peachy, pinky colours, because I do like to use them. And I'm pretty sure with these earthy colours and these pinks, I'll be able to get a good range. So I'm pretty happy about this selection. If you would like to find out more about how I go with using these colours, some of the mixes that I experiment with, let me know, because I might do another video where I use these colours either in a painting or another swatching video where I share some of my favourite combinations and you can see how the colours mix together. Before I sign off, I will mention that I am working on my free course, which is a taster for my 6-week course, Modern Mixed Media. Modern Mixed Media is a mixed media course, but it incorporates watercolour as the main paint. So if you've enjoyed this video and would like to learn more about using watercolour in your art, but also combining it with things like pens and pastels and collage and all sorts of different substrates, really approaching watercolour in a very creative way, then make sure you are on my newsletter list, which is laurahornart.com/newsletter, because I do have a free course coming out soon, as well as my signature course, which will be running in October and November this year in 2024. So that's a course that I only offer every so often. So if you are interested in learning more, make sure you are on my newsletter list to stay updated. And as always, I love hearing from you. Let me know if you love any of these colours. Perhaps you use them. Maybe you can see some colours that might be a good swap or addition to this palette. I'm always interested to hear your thoughts on watercolour paints and how you like to set up your own palette for ultimate enjoyment and also colour mixing too.